What's up, guys? Matt, Legacy 4x4. We're going to finish up the back half of my 2000 Dodge Ram 1500 by building an upper triangulated 4-link suspension system. Alright guys, before we start, let me just clarify, I by no means am a subject matter expert on 4-link and 3-link and link suspensions in general. Although I've built a few link suspensions in my past, I would not call myself an expert. The majority of the information in this video, I'm really just relying on Jake from Busted Knuckle and Nate from Dirt Lifestyle. I really like watching those guys. They put out some great informational content, and that's where I learned most of my link suspension, aside from, trial and error from what I've done. But besides that, let's get into what Barnes sent me for this link conversion, as well as what I'm using to do this entire conversion process. Alright, so let's get into it. I'll be using Fox 2.0 coilovers. I bought used, got a good deal on those, so I'm not going to spend new and buy new parts for those coilovers. Barnes has a DOM kit that has upper and lower pieces of DOM. They are 4-foot links. I'm going to use all 4 feet of them. I'm going to try to not shorten those at all, especially since I'm working with a full-size truck platform. I should have enough room to do it. Barnes also sent complete sets of left and right-handed thread heim joints. As well, they also sent all the mounting hardware for the axle side as well as frame side. A quick note about all this stuff is that I was initially going to do a double triangulated 4-link, but upon closer inspection, my math wasn't correct, and a double triangulated is not going to work for cleaning the drive shaft in my Dodge. But I don't think that'll be the end of the world. We're going to use the mounts they provided for the double triangulated, and we're just going to shove them on the frame, and we're just going to have a single upper triangulated 4-link, but all the private parts should still work with a little modification. I also got the Super Duty truss from Barnes 4-wheel drive. I figured why not? If I'm doing the rest of it, I might as well get the truss as well. So looking at the back of this truck, you can see I have everything cleared out of the way. I have the axle centered already, as well as the pinion pointed at the back of the transfer case on my 2003 Super Duty axle. So this is a really good starting point. To get to this point, you really should measure about 10 times. I probably did it about 20 times to make sure that everything's nice and centered, but I'm happy with where it is. So now we can get right into doing the 4-link. The easiest part of this 4-link suspension is going to be putting on parts that I know are going to have a semi-permanent home throughout this whole process. And I'm going to start with putting on that truss in the middle of the axle, centering up in the middle of the axle, as well as tacking on my lower link mounts at the furthest point possible on the axle. As per putting them at the furthest point on the axle, that's strictly based off Jake from Busted Knuckles. I mean, they run full-size competition rock bouncers all the time. They're incredible at what they do. And his advice is always to stick that lower link as far on the outside of the axle as possible to provide enough stability going left and right. So when you see me putting those on at the furthest point possible on that axle, that's my reasoning. Alright, before I take you down to the axle and make sure everything's symmetrical with this truss and everything's in place and everything measures out, I need to clarify that I have a really bad HOA where I live, and they told me I can't work on my car in my driveway, so I'm in my backyard, which means I don't have my big welding table, which means this nice 2-inch thick piece of pine resting on the back of my frame is going to be my welding table. So don't judge, don't judge. I'm gonna make do. Everything's gonna be okay, but let's clarify, the Barnes kit does not come fully welded, so I'm going to tack together this truss. We're going to take the truss, tack together, put it down on the axle, center everything up on the truss, and then we're going to keep pushing forward and make sure everything's centered. And, if I'm going to give you a tech tip, the only tech tip I'm going to give you is to tack everything in. For whatever reason, every time I build a link suspension, I always get too carried away, I get too brave, and then I fully weld a mount in, and then I find out later on I need to move the mount. So this time, we're going to make sure that we tack everything in first, and then we make sure the whole suspension is exactly where I want it before I fully weld anything. Alright guys, so I got the truss tacked in, I got it resting on the axle. I'm really happy with that clearance. You could probably grind that down and get that touching everywhere, but doing triple passes on the axle itself, everything's going to clean up nice and fine. So with that being said, I think I'm ready to fully weld this truss. Not much to it, the truss is the easiest part, so I'm going to take it off, fully weld the whole truss, put it back on the axle, and then tack it into the axle and make sure everything is nice and fitting still. And then I'll probably end up fully welding this into the axle since I know it's not going to move and everything else is set in place. So enjoy the show, let's get to it. Alright, well, I had to weld outside. Like I said, I don't have access to welding in my driveway with my covered garage, so outdoor MIG welding it is. For my settings, I'm running 75-25 gas. I've got it on lots of speed and 1/4 inch penetration, 220 with the 50-foot extension cord. That's basically my setup, so if it's not perfect, it's because I'm not in perfect conditions, but I doubt that weld will ever break or cause any stress. So there it is. The truss is welded up. We're going to go ahead and clean off the axle and get it on the axle, make sure it's nice and centered on the axle. Alright guys, I saved you the effort of watching me weld a truss on, and here we go. Here's where we're at. We've got the truss fully welded onto the axle. We've got it welded at like probably 15 different points. You know, the welds aren't the prettiest, but they're triple pass and they're not going anywhere, and that's what really counts, you know. Truss is on the axle. Nothing really much more to say about that, but we did get to the first part of our math section of today's lesson. So let me go over link separation vertically between the mounts on the axle side real quick. Alright, so as you can see, I got my upper link sitting on top of the truss, and I got a straight edge going down to below the axle where I'm going to put the lower links. The understood goodness relationship between those upper and lower mounts is 25% of your tire size. I don't think I'm ever going to go above 37s, but I might go to 40s, so that means I want at least 10 inches of separation. And from the upper holes to the bottom hole, I'm looking at 11.5, 12 inches. So I got plenty of separation. That's going to be a plenty strong relationship between those twos. Alright, before I get much further, let me show you guys where I'm at and show you guys some progress that I've been making. So I went ahead and tacked in the upper links after I tacked in the lower links. Those upper links are sitting at about 30 degrees a piece going towards the frame from the center line. In terms of these lower links, I tacked them in as well. Let me get under the car and show you guys how they look. Alright, so those are the lower links. As you can see, they're both welded in parallel. I went ahead and did a vertical separation between my upper link mounts over there and my lower links to 9.5 inches. That's pretty much ideal for 37. So I went ahead and made that 9.5 instead of dropping it down to 12 or 13, because that lower link angle is super important for geometry as well, and I don't want that lower link to be more than 10 degrees. Next thing we're going to do is work on the frame side link mounts and tie this all together. But we're probably going to do it tomorrow because it's getting dark, and I think my dog's ready to go inside. Kaiser, hey! You sleepy? You sleepy? Yeah, we're probably going to go call it for the night. Oh, thank you for the kisses. I will catch you guys tomorrow and we can work on the frame side. Alright, good morning. It's a new day. We're going to get right into this one. So, first thing I'm going to do is take my DOM, take my Heims, and I'm going to tack everything in. I'm planning on using all 4 feet of the Barnes kit. I have enough room in this truggy to fit the whole 4 feet, so I'm going to try and make it work. So, I'm going to do a nice light tack on each end with both Heims on each piece of DOM. So that's all 4 pieces of DOM, all 8 Heims, tack it in. Throw that in the lower mounts, raise that up to the frame, and then tack in my upper mounts on the frame. And then we can measure up, make sure the geometry all checks out. Alright guys, so you see that little tab at the very front of this lower mount? I have these at such a high angle that gets in the way of the Heim joint, so I'm going to plasma cut that off real quick, as well as plasma cut off my old leaf spring hangers. Those don't need to be there anymore. Let me just say really fast, I will never not own a plasma cutter again. I can't tell you guys how much easier this is than grinding things off. I mean, it's just butter, it cuts right through it. Alright guys, next step's going to be making these upper mounts for the side of the frame. It's really easy, there's not a lot to it. All you want to do is throw a bolt through it to center everything. Get a nice pinch on the bracket. You could also use the bolt and tighten it down, but I don't think it's necessary. Alright, again, we're going to use a plasma cutter to cut this double triangulation bracket. We're going to cut it right on each side of where the brackets go. And then we'll have 2 lower length brackets. Let's get to it. Alright guys, as you can see, I got all the links on the axle side in, and they're all pointing up towards the frame. I've got all the brackets and bolts underneath the truck. It's really hard to record, so I'm just not going to record tacking it in. Once I get everything tacked in, I'm going to come up, run a few more tests, do some calculations, make sure everything's going to look nice and pretty with this 4-link in terms of its geometry, and then do some final measurements before I get to burn everything in permanently. Alright, so just my luck, it poured. It piss poured outside. Everything's foggy. The camera's probably fogging up just by being outside right now. But let me show you what we're at. So as you can see, the angle of separation I have in my upper links is really sitting at about 35 degrees. So 35 degrees is not ideal. The minimum is 40. I'm shooting for 45. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and cut the lower and upper links about 8 inches shorter, get that more of an angle, and try and get past 45 degrees. Alright guys, so we got the links all in place. I don't know if you can see that with the contrast from the sun, but we have all the links fully welded in, as well as the links to the heims themselves. Everything's fully welded in, everything's in place, nothing's going anywhere. While we're looking at it from this direction, let me just show you guys, this is my link separation angle. I have 42 degrees, that's right above the minimum, but I can't really get a much more extreme angle than 42 degrees. I can't really produce a bigger angle due to the fact that my frame is boxed underneath the cab, and those upper mounts are going straight to the end of the boxed section of the frame, so I don't really want to weld to the U-channel, so those are at their pretty much max position in terms of me liking how the welds are going to be. Let me go over a little bit of this triangulation math. So that bottom link that you see right there, you want that link to be less than 10 degrees. That link is currently sitting at 4 degrees, so that's super ideal for me. And those top links, you want them as flat as possible, and these top links are perfectly flat. So that's really good for characteristics in terms of keeping everything in line, keeping the pinion pointed straight at the transfer case, as well as flex characteristics. So really happy with that. I ran the numbers on my 4-link calculator, and I got that I'm gonna have 145% anti-squat, which is good for rock crawling. It's kind of right on the edge, but good enough for me, and I'll definitely take that. Alright, the next thing we gotta do is mount these coilovers. As you can see, I took my stock Super Duty shock mounts, put those back on the frame, tacked them in, and those are gonna be my lower coilover mounting point. Okay, so it's been a few days. You guys saw the back half video already, so we're gonna jump back into the 4-link video, and that last thing we're gonna do for the 4-link video is finish off these coilovers and get everything nice and mounted. Okay, let's talk coilovers real fast. So for coilovers, these are Fox 2.0 coilovers. I bought them used, bought new springs, and that's what we're gonna rock with. To mount them to the truck, I have a Barnes 4-wheel drive shock tower on top of a 1/4 inch thick 2x4 with a 3/8 inch cap on the top, all welded and gusseted to the frame. So that's how those look, that's how they're welded in. Nothing too special about them. I really like the way the towers look compared to traditional mounts. I think those look really classy. I guess you guys also haven't seen that tire stinger that I made. I just did that on a whim. I didn't record it, there's no video for it, but all that is a nice little pseudo stinger that I'm using for a spare tire carrier. I think it adds a lot of depth to the back of the truck, and that's why it's there. For the lower mounts, I have my stock F350 shock mounts that are hard welded to the axle, and all I'm gonna do for those is turn them around 90 degrees. That way they are parallel with those upper mounts, and there's enough room for the coilover to flex, and that's how those are gonna work. Just nice and simple like that. All I did was chop the top off, flip it, and then weld that to the shock mount with a nice piece of 1/4 inch plate on top of that to make the floor. So as you can see, I have the passenger side done already. Next thing I'm gonna do is just finish up that driver's side, and we can call these 4 links complete, plus or minus some correct bolts and spacers for getting them all balanced in place. Talking some of the details, I went with 175-pound primaries as well as 100-pound secondary springs, both 18 inches long. Those are about the max you can run on 16-inch travel coilovers. If I did my redneck beer math correctly, this should provide me about 9 inches of down travel and about 7 inches of up travel for the shock. So that's why I went with those spring rates, and hopefully they end up balancing and settling out just at the correct amount. As you can see, I don't have the misalignment spacers in because I'm waiting on some more bolt spacers, but that's how those are gonna work. 2 misalignment spacers going through the top of the coilover, and then some spacers going to the edge of the bolt, and some grade 8 washers. My only concern with this is that those bolts are 3/8 inch grade 8 bolts, and 3/8 is not very thick if you're talking about your whole suspension going through and articulating through that. So hopefully those don't shear, but if they do, I'll have to come up with a better way to put a bigger bolt through those coilover ears. The reason I'm going with a 3/8 inch bolt is because that's what those misalignment spacers take. The inside of those misalignment spacers are built for 3/8 inch bolts, so that's just what I'm going with. If they shear, then I'll know I have to upgrade, and we can do that later. So that's gonna be fun, testing that out, see if those grade 8 shear, but we'll see. That's gonna be a later me problem. Right now, the only thing on my mind is finishing up this side and making sure the back end of this Dodge sits right where I want it to in terms of travel length and ride height. So just like that, 1, 2, 3, done. And just like that, we have the driver's side mount done. Everything is in place, weld it perpendicular to that upper tower, and we're good to go. That right there is 7 inches of up travel and 9 inches of down travel. I'm good with that for now. For now, this one's done, guys. This is the 4-link build on the 2000 Dodge Ram 1500 Truggy.